a lot of times in a mental space of trying to accept paradox. I mean, my bachelor's thesis I did on Buddhism, so I was already kind of comfortable with this dual space of we're doing intense symbolic logic, but we are doing it so that we can have enlightened, realizations about God. Because just as much as there are realms of magical practice that involve a large amount of research, if you never take that research and apply it in praxis, it doesn't matter how much you understand it, you're not really engaged in the work, and there's actually a level of understanding that you're not going to ever be able to reach. You have to actively practice it, and it's that way with Kabbalah too. It doesn't matter how much I study about a sphere, unless I sit down in active meditation on what that intelligence represents, I only have this one-dimensional human kind of idea of what that sphere might be.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. For episode 92, we welcome McCalla Ann, founder, podcaster, and creator behind Saturn Vox, a multimedia, occult education and divination platform based out of New Orleans, Louisiana. McCalla was born in Atlanta, Georgia, to a Catholic family on her mother's side, and had a large Jewish heritage on her father's side. Though she attended Catholic high school until high school, she turned to the occult at an early age, beginning her studies on witchcraft and tarot at the early age of 15. McCalla left Atlanta for New Orleans to attend college at Loyola University, where she graduated with honors in philosophy and world religions, with a concentration in Buddhism and its implications on language. Studying Buddhist philosophy and Chinese linguistics gave McCalla a unique perspective into language use as depicted by pictorial symbols, as opposed to the phonetic style of the West. This perspective involves an understanding of each pictorial symbol as holding multiple layers of meanings, and the ability to be able to hold all those meanings in one's mind, so as to map out a full four-dimensional picture of these two-dimensional shapes. During her downtime in college, McCalla began to delve deeper into more formal realms of occult study, beginning her study of the Jewish Kabbalah and mysticism with vigor, and upon graduation she was more than happy to turn her attention to these studies, along with those of traditional witchcraft. She currently practices a flavour of witchcraft that flawlessly blends her studies in philosophy, folklore and linguistic arts into a fusion of animism, theurgy and Kabbalistic, as well as astrological study. Now in the Plus Show we discuss aesthetics and art as juxtaposed with magic and what that means for people's view of the world. And we pull that thread into ideas around Tiferet and explore the concept of living in joy. And McCalla also discusses Saturn in further detail. And it's a really illuminating and engaging conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. Now if you'd like to hear the Plus Show, the easiest way to do that is to click on the Patreon link below in my link tree and come and join the party. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can always buy me a book or, give us the old 5-star review. Right, let's get on with the show. McCalla Ann, you are very welcome to the Spirit Box. And it's take two on the introduction, as my home life has interrupted the initial recording. You're very welcome. Could you give the audience an introduction into yourself and your work?
Yes. Okay. So, hi, I am McCalla Ann. I run what I'm kind of calling a multimedia platform, which is called Saturn Vox. I do professional divination. I've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now. I host a podcast, which is also called Saturn Vox. And mostly magically, I find my studies based in mysticism as well as chaos magic and a little bit of folklore.
Oh, fantastic! I wasn't aware of the folklore bit. That's really interesting. So you've got your own podcast, your own show, which is fantastic. I'm a fan of your work. I really enjoyed it. And one of the things we were chatting about earlier was, or I was saying earlier, was about listening to you talk to Sasha Ravich, who is a guest on this show a couple of months back. I was really struck by the level of your insight and knowledge into the subject areas of interest and the subject areas of expertise of Sasha, and that was one I kind of wanted to ask you about then as well. Is like, what drew you into that space? And that's kind of one of the areas I love to explore with people like yourself. Is, what started you out on this path into the level of depth of study? What drew you in?
So I feel like that's a loaded question because there's so many different entry points that I could start at, but I guess really I've always been interested in the occult. Um, I went to Catholic school, and I remember somebody handing me a book that was about all the different world religions, but it was written from the perspective of a Catholic. And so it was kind of one of those propaganda books that was like, here's what people believe, and here's why you shouldn't believe them. Here's why you should pick Catholicism. And of course, I've been a voracious reader ever since I was a young girl, reading any fantasy novel that I could get my hands on. And the very last religion in this book was Wicca. And I was like, holy shit, people are actually witches. Like, this isn't just something from a book. This is something I can actually study and learn and basically fulfill my childhood dream of being a witch. So instead of getting me to become more Catholic, it actually opened up this door for me to just accept that this was something that was also in real life or tangible in real life and not just in the storybooks. So from there, I did kind of weirdly was new age for a while, kind of involved in paranormal groups and burner communities that I would now kind of say are not as in the depth of academic study as what I do now. And I kind of grew out of it very quickly just because, astrologically speaking, I have Saturn and the moon conjunct each other in the ninth house, which is the house of philosophy, theology, metaphysics. So I just think natally, I would have never fallen into New Age or Wicca, which is not New Age, but it's not really academic enough for me. It's just my chart. It's just in my chart. So I kind of was agnostic for a while. I went to college. I studied world religions and philosophy because I just really wanted to know God. It was just always important that I wanted to understand consciousness and God. And I felt like those were the two best fields to study those things. And just coincidentally through that found out that, oh, actually a lot of philosophers were also magicians. And once I put those two together, it was kind of like all bets were off, and I was allowed to re-enter this space of occult through this new, more philosophic perspective or mystic perspective. There were definitely, like, I'm kind of underplaying it a bit because there were dreams that I was getting that were like encouraging me to go back as well. So it wasn't just like oh, I happened to stumble across porphyry and realized, that I could do this. It was more like I started getting dreams, and then that caused me to do more research, and then I put two and two together and like reconciled it within my own heart. So It's kind of long-winded. I hope that made sense.
No, thank you. I think it's really, really interesting. I love what you said there about how you wanted to know God, and that's yes, it's just really striking. Because I also know exactly what you mean, in terms of that kind of impetus, that driver, to explore, to know, to understand as much as we can, as in our current forms, as it were. What really interests me is that academic flair that you have shown, and are comes through in your work a lot. And how does that marry up, that academic study, that kind of that deep work? I've seen you're working in Kabbalah, that constant book heavy study. How does that marry up with that more kind of I guess the mystical side of that search of, I want to know God, that impulse to understand, to explore, like, it seems to come from a mystical place, that idea of, I want to know God, and then but the drivers and the route you're taking is a very academic one. How does that marry up for you?
So to me, it's kind of an engagement between the conventional and the, universal. I exist a lot of times in a mental space of trying to accept paradox. I mean, my bachelor's thesis I did on Buddhism. So I was already kind of comfortable with this dual space of, we're doing intense symbolic logic, but we are doing it so that we can have enlightened, realizations about God. So Kabbalah is very similar to where I will read and I will write. And as I'm reading and I'm writing, it's like, oh, I have this epiphany. Oh, I realize, oh, now this, oh, that's how it falls together. And I like to think that it's also a union between me and my spirit guides and me and my ancestors, because there will also be moments that I will just be, I wouldn't say meditating, like active meditation, but just like peaceful, no thought in outside space. Like I'm just sitting in my garden, or I'm just walking from point A to point B on autopilot, and something will catch my eye. And I'll just have this click moment, like this inner knowing feels like it's permeating through my body. And I oftentimes don't think that those things come from me. It's like, I said this to someone else the other day. It's like I do the research first, and then my spirits kind of sort it out and in my consciousness and allow me to have these epiphanies later on.
And kind of pulling that thread a bit, are you guided in like a very literal sense to, like, pick up that book, or talk to that person? Is that the kind of thing that happens there?
Sometimes it does happen that way, yes. There are definitely times when it falls into place like that, where you were mentioning how, intelligent I sounded on the interview with Sasha. But I had just had a conversation with another really good friend of mine, Joshua Madara, who was actually my first guest on the podcast, about cognitive blending the day before me and Sasha did that interview. Like Josh was teaching me about semiotics. And then I got on the podcast and I realized, oh, Sasha's talking about semiotics. But it wasn't something
Right.
that I had even known 24 hours ahead of time. So shout out to Josh for making me seem smart.
It's like you were well briefed. Brilliant. Um, and you mentioned, like, I guess talking about semiotics to a degree, like, and how, like, you've done some work on seeing symbols, that piece you did on an exploration of of the esoteric in tarot. How much has, like, talk to me about symbolism, because what I'm really interested in and what I'm really kind of drawn to is this is that how the mystic and the kind of academic kind of bump up against each other, and what unfolds from that, because you do see it again and again, and lots of areas of magic, as you well know, require a deep investment in study, in repetition, it's like you got to do your homework, and your research. When you explore symbolism, particularly like in looking at divination, or when you explore symbolism in looking at things like Kabbalah, you mentioned you there is an aspect of kind of engagement with spirit. How subtle is that, or is it direct? Does it feel direct?
It really depends. Oftentimes, I find when I'm reading for clients, I think it just does oftentimes come through like a channel. I don't feel like I have a problem with knowing which layer of symbolism the card represents when I'm reading for other people. It tends to be more of a problem when I'm reading for myself. That was actually one of the first indicators to me that I was maybe channeling when I first started reading tarot, because it would be this weird sensation of, I would try to read for myself and I would look at the cards and I would be like, I don't know what these mean. But I didn't have a problem with that when reading for my clients. So I was like, where is the disconnect? I realized, oh, because I'm channeling spirits oftentimes, or they're the ones that are pointing me in that direction. But I think to answer like your deeper question about symbolism and that the engagement between learning about the symbols versus allowing them to permeate through you, it is like this space of you'd like to find the harmonious tension between the two, ideally, because just as much as there are realms of magical practice that involve a large amount of research, if you never take that research and apply it in praxis, it doesn't matter how much you understand it, you're not really engaged in the work. And there's actually a level of understanding that you're not going to ever be able to reach. You have to actively practice it. And it's that way with Kabbalah too, is it doesn't matter how much I study about a sphere, unless I sit down in active meditation on what that intelligence represents. I only have this one-dimensional human kind of idea of what that sphere might be. And so it takes this allowing yourself to run and return between the two spaces that, again, kind of allows the wisdom to permeate through your subconscious. And then you're not even actively thinking about it like, oh, I'm, interpreting symbols. It's like, I just know, I just have a knowing inside of me. At least that's how it works for me.
And is that reflective of you mentioned kind of dreams, and dreams having an impact on your direction. Is it a similar thing to that? Are your dreams, were they a literal thing, or were they a more symbolic thing? And what was, I guess what I'm asking for in some of these questions really is what's that moment in terms of when this your kind of journey into this space, when it stops being kind of an area of inquiry and an interest, and you get that moment where you're like, this is real, this is different, it's real.
Okay. So I do want to quickly clarify, it's important for the rest of the story, that I actually do not do a lot of psychic dreaming. I sometimes do. I wouldn't say that I never do, but that's definitely not like my most powerful gift. I don't know if you need to cut this part out, but a lot of it has to do because I smoke
Sure.
weed.
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
smoke
Yeah.
weed, and so then that will really it inhibits me from being able to dream every night
Right.
or to
Okay.
dream
Yeah.
properly. So the story is that I studied abroad in Japan.
Hmm.
I went to Japan to study Buddhism actually
Oh wow.
for school because that was what I was doing my thesis on.
Right.
So I spent 6 months in Tokyo, and they have super intense drug laws.
Mm.
So I just didn't smoke weed while I was there. I
Right.
just didn't smoke at all.
Hmm.
And so I started dreaming every night. Um, and so while I didn't even think about this until you're asking me these questions, but one of the things that I was learning while I was in Japan is I was actually doing a little bit of work on Chinese linguistics. Why? Because the pictorial language of China and of Japan and of Korea is it activates a different part of our brain. It actually activates both the right and the left hemisphere instead of only activating, I believe it's I don't know, whichever one is the analytical one is the one that phonetic languages will activate. But a pictorial language will actually activate both. You're being stimulated on both levels. And the hypothesis that my teacher was trying to push why he was having us study Chinese linguistics in a Buddhism class was to emphasize that this is why Buddhism flourished in East Asia. This is why the Chinese and the Japanese were able to embrace it in a way that has always been difficult for Westerners, because they could understand the paradox that was being presented through Buddhism because their language was already presented to them in a way that was multi-layered, where every character is a complex character is just built up of simple characters, which demonstrates the interconnection between this idea and that idea. It also allows them to, kind of, I envision it like flipping through a picture book, and you have to say, oh, it's this layer that the picture is representing. So it's all about context clues sometimes for you to understand what the Chinese character is trying to portray. So as I'm learning about all this, and please bear in mind that I had not really studied witchcraft at this point. Like I had read Silver Ravenwolf's How to Ride a Raven Silverwolf, whatever her name is, How to Ride a Silver Broomstick, and like other books that were very popular for solitary Wiccans in the 90s. But that was things I'd read at 16 years old, and this is almost a decade later from that. I had a dream where it was Hecate, and I'd never heard her name before. I didn't know who she was. I just was we were sitting down at a table, and she was reading my cards. She was reading my tarot cards. And so it's funny because at the time, like I didn't remember what she had said or what the reading was or anything about that. I just woke up and I remembered it was Hecate and she had been reading my cards. Oh, and I did remember that she had said to me, "You are supposed to be doing this. Why do you not pay attention to this?" So that was like my wake up call. I did not throw myself into it while I was still in Japan, but as soon as I got back to America, I set up an altar. I started doing research, and within maybe 7 months of that experience, I'm working in a voodoo shop in New Orleans. and just talking to anybody who will answer any question and reading any book that I can get my hands on. So I wouldn't say that that's like a moment where you're like, oh my God, this is real, because nothing, it's not like I did magic or I asked for anything. But looking up who Hecate was and like finding out that she was a real deity, she was queen of the witches, and she's like sitting here telling me that I need to be a witch, that felt real, because where did my subconscious come up with that otherwise? Because I wasn't, people always ask me when I tell this story, oh, you must have seen it somewhere. You saw her name somewhere. I really didn't. I really wasn't involved in this world. So there was no way that I know she's very popular now, but I did not know that at the time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that was the moment.
Yeah, I really, that really resonates a lot, and there's been like a few guests who've been on the show who have had that kind of tap on the shoulder from Hecate, like you're not alone in that area, and it seems to be one of those things where some people are born initiated, and that's what that tap on the shoulder is. It's kind of by the way, this is what you are. That kind of thing. And how did that settle with you? I mean, it sounds like you were fairly comfortable with that, and you'd made changes in your life that brought you to New Orleans, that kind of in the shop you were working in. It sounds like you took to it pretty well. Was it a jarring thing, or were you quite comfortable?
I don't want to sound egotistical, because I truly believe in humility above all things. But no, it did not surprise me. It felt right and deserved. It felt like, I don't know how much you read tarot, but it was a 9 of Cups moment, because it was like this thing that you had been dreaming of and wishing for, and just feeling with all of your might like, this is something I want to do from a very young age. To have some sort of authority figure come and say, oh yeah, that's for you, you're allowed to do that. It is kind of like both a relief and this feeling of like, I knew it at the same time.
I'm a complete tarot luddite. I've no deep comprehension whatsoever. So yeah, I'm afraid that means very little to me. um, to my great shame, exploring these areas. But that's a wonderful thing, listening to that reflection like that. That's just a wonderful thing, and to have that revelation and to have that solidify in your life and in the path you're going down. That, it's one of the wonderful things that I do get a lot from this show, talking to people like yourself who are having experiences like this, and the direction it's taken you, is there's just people listening that will take a lot from that, who may be at that stage where a spirit is calling them for something that they have a soul calling to do. Now, taking a entirely different direction, and I wanted to ask you about your show, and the impetus to do that, to create the show, to talk to people about their areas of expertise and conversations you wanted to have. What's beneath, the idea of showcasing work? What's the impetus for you there? And I ask this really as a fellow podcaster, because I'm interested in the ideas behind it.
and kind of what the urge was to do to create the show.
So I don't know how many other podcasters will have this answer. I think, I mean, there are two reasons. One, of course, was because I really wanted to learn more. I always am wanting to learn more. And I definitely don't believe that, learning is an independent process. I think everything is interdependent. We are always both student and teacher at the same time. So, what better way to learn than to talk to the people that are, other people that are doing the work? So, that was definitely a part of it. That was, I think, my first reasoning why I wanted to do it. But then something really sad happened. I'm in a Saturn return right now, and the way that my Saturn placement is set up is because of Saturn doing all that retrograding last year. It actually hit my natal Saturn 3 times. So I had a very, I would say, traumatic year last year. And a lot of it had to do with people making me feel small, people making me feel like I should not open my mouth and talk. I was literally getting told that. Essentially, I was told, you have an evil spirit that makes it so that no one wants to pay any attention to you, and it's futile for you to do that. So that was the sort of feedback that I was getting from some people who are not in my life anymore. And I spent, a good 2 months basically being afraid to post anything. Even on my private Facebook, I was like, nobody wants to hear me speak. I need to just completely silence myself. And then the idea came back, like it came floating back. And it was like, remember how you had this idea? And I'm the type of person who always wants to heal. I don't believe in stagnation. I don't believe in letting, I think that Saturn can liberate you of your chains of trauma just as much as Saturn can bind you to your trauma. And a lot of it has to do with taking accountability and putting the work in. So to me, this part of me that just wanted to collapse inward and not vocalize my thoughts or opinions anymore, that was like chaining myself to my trauma. So the opposite of that is do the podcast, like talk to people, press publish. It's still kind of a little bit like shadow work for me whenever I'm sitting there editing the sound waves and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that, or whatever. Um, and every time, nobody ever has any negative feedback. And so every time I feel myself healing a little bit, it's a little bit easier to press publish. It's a little bit easier to press publish. So yeah, I guess both of my reasons are rather selfish. They're both because to help me be a better occultist and to help me not be chained to my, trauma of fearing the other. But I do truly believe that the podcast serves that same purpose for other people. I wanted the podcast to be a space where people could realize that there was a vastness to the occult. I also wanted it to be a place where people who are different kinds of learners, like everybody has a different way that they learn, and not everybody is going to be able to sit down and read 32 books in 1 year. Like that's absurd for me to believe that, but I want other people to like have the same resources that I do. So what better way than to just talk about it on a podcast instead of making them read the book? So I guess those are my 3 reasons.
Oh, I love that. I think that's fantastic. So firstly, congratulations on a wonderful podcast.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoy it, and I'm just really chuffed for you to, you know, surmount something that was difficult and traumatic, and to come back with you know, sharing your voice with us. It's great. It's really good work, you know. And yeah, and I know exactly what you mean when you kind of press the publish button. You know, you ask all these questions of like, do I have the right to do this? You know, I mean, I'm constantly torn with kind of the ideas of, you know, what do I sound like? Do I even know what I'm talking about? All that kind of stuff. You know, and I'm sure there's people out there going, you don't. So you don't sound. But there's people who do. So it's all good. People, you know, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of just say that, to commend you on stepping over that barrier and moving on past it. These things are difficult, and I love to hear that kind of thing. I just think it's brilliant. You know, I really do. So commend you on that.
Thank you.
And I also really value what you're saying about people learning different ways. So I'm dyslexic. So
Me too.
oh snap! High five. Yeah, but I'm a voracious reader as well. But some information I struggle to retain. And concentration can be a challenge sometimes. So I really absorb stuff through podcasts, and I think that was I think that's an important contribution to our cultural area. You know, that we document these great conversations, and you know, people can digest them, you know, at their leisure, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. Again, you know, as I said again, I really got a lot from your conversation with Sasha. It was really interesting to hear you two unpack ideas and go back and forth on it, you know, from you know, very knowledgeable perspective. I really got an awful lot from it. And is that where the name comes from, Saturn Vox? Is it like your voice with Saturn, you know, in your chart?
So that's another funny story that's just like a series of syncs.
Right.
I used to be a circus performer. I was a circus performer from 18 to probably 27-ish, thereabouts. And the main circus that I would do is I would spin hoops. I would spin hula hoops, double hoops, and a little bit of lyra, the aerial hoop. So that originally was where the name Saturn got brought in, because my stage name as a circus performer was Saturn Web. It's weird because now I do also have a thing about spiders, but it was just because of the ring. It was just Saturn's ring, and I don't know, like weird goth girl, so Saturn Web. That was my thoughts behind that. Then when I was trying to come up with a name for the platform, truth be told, I did not know at the time that Saturn ruled my chart. I was not as versed in astrology. I actually thought that my main planet was Mercury, because I have a Gemini ascendant. So I was kind of going in more Mercury name directions. And then one of my best friends from my circus years said, "Oh, what about Saturn Web, like you did for that?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe." And then my partner at the time, who's still one of my best friends, he said, "I think it should be Saturn Vox." It was literally, I let other people make that. I thought, oh yeah, Saturn Vox, Saturn speaks. And I already kind of knew I wanted to potentially do a podcast at the time. So I thought, oh, that's perfect because Saturn speaks. So Saturn Vox. Then I got a reading from Sasha Ravitch. And she was really the one that pointed it out to me that, yeah, Saturn, like, it's not a joke for me. Saturn really does rule everything around me.
Right.
It dominates every other planet in my chart. So it's just one of those weird syncs, you know?
That's so interesting. Really, really interesting. And And I love that. I love that kind of like unpacking one's chart and getting those kind of insights and understandings. Like mine's full of Pluto, like and it just ties in exactly with these areas of exploration. It's like it's always been. I mean, using the kind of the bullshit apps that I use to to look at this kind of stuff. It's always kind of you'll be drawn to the occult. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, you have a lot of Scorpio in your chart?
I'm Scorpio moon. Yeah, and but I think there's a couple of placements as well. I have to check. I've been signed out of the app that I have. I haven't bothered signing in again. I can't remember my password, and it's the kind of thing that I'm very lazy at. Once I have to reset a password, I'm like, we're breaking up. Me and you, me and this app are breaking up. If they want me to reset something or fill out any kind of form, that's instantaneous no. Yeah, Scorpio moon. That's the principle. Well, that's all I know really. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at this stuff.
Oh, that's okay. I am not an expert either. I sometimes pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but
yeah. But it is remarkable, like looking at these areas and then seeing kind of like 100% kind of reflections of your own behavior kind of played back to you. It can be quite illuminating, and shocking at times when you think about the level of complexity that has gone into this system. I mean, it's a huge level of complexity that goes into this system, and where all that came from. That's the bit that blows my mind. It's when I think about, like, well, how was this determined? When you start looking at those kind of ideas and really like pulling those threads, and you get this whole thing of like, well, you had kind of the ancient kind of Babylonians had lots of time to look at the sky and all this kind of stuff, And
it was, I think, like thousands of years, or maybe 1,000 years of them. It was a theocracy there, the Babylonian Empire and the Mesopotamian Empire. So when they were actually considered like government workers, which is crazy if you think about it. But so and it was so that they would say, oh, the sky was it looked like this, and here's what happened. And they compile that data for 1,000 years or so before they start going, okay, we see the pattern, which is wild.
I mean, basically, they're the first data scientists.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. That's remarkable. It really is. And when you then think about it in terms of that has to be manually indexed, like there's no search string queries that you can use to automatically pull back. How many instances happened when we had that particular bad war, that came out of nowhere, or when you're establishing these kind of like life-changing events, how do we determine those patterns? That all has to be manually indexed. How remarkable.
I cannot imagine.
Yeah, I that's the thing. I don't think I've got the cognitive capacity to even comprehend. The time's too big. The variations are too big to comprehend. I love it. So intriguing, so interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you about ancestor work as well, because I've seen that come up in your work and what you present on Instagram, and in terms of your heritage and Kabbalah, and I guess to talk about it, has that always been there? Has that been something that's kind of surfaced of late, or has come through ancestor work? Could you talk to that?
Yeah. So no, it has not always been there. If anything, I'm basically estranged from my entire family. I am not close to a single person in my family, and it's really been that way since I was a child. Because my mom had me at 42. My dad was 50. His kids were having kids when I was born. And she also had a child 13 years older than me. They just basically decided to start this family with me, like after they had already completed their other families. So that the age gap, along with the fact that I just think that my brothers resented the fact that my dad chose to be a father instead of a grandfather, just created a lot of tension between me and this idea of family. My dad's grandparents already passed away. My mother only has, her grandma left. So like I don't even really have the grandmas or anything. So what happened is that my mother died. My mom passed away in September of 2019. So it really wasn't even that long ago that I started connecting with my ancestors. Of course, through the pandemic, every year feels like 5 now. So maybe I have been at it for longer than I think. But so yeah, she died, I guess it was September of 2019. And that October was when I set up my first ancestor altar. At the time, I had already been pretty heavily studied in Kabbalah with a Q, like Israel Regardie and the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley. Like I've been reading from the Thoth deck, and I had learned how to read tarot by learning Kabbalah. So I'd already been a part of that, right? So it's kind of funny. This is another one of those, oh shit, this is real moments. Is I used to read my ancestors' books, early stages of the pandemic when we didn't really have anything to do. It was easier to just maintain this weekly habit where I would sit and I would read to them for about an hour or so. And I wanted to get to know my Jewish ancestors. They were the ones that I was more removed from that than my mom's side of the family. I was raised Catholic. My mom would take me to see the family in Kentucky 3 times a year. So, but my dad's family from New York, we never went to go see. So I really had no real idea about Judaism or Kabbalah with a K, except for the fact that I did date a rabbi's son for a while. And so I was able to learn some things from Rabbi Weinrich. But for most intents and purposes, I didn't know anything. Anyways, I sit down to read my ancestors' Israel Regardie. And I just start hearing this in the back of my head. Don't you read us that. We don't want that. Get that. How dare you? Sort of thing. And it's like, he's anti-Semitic. We don't like him. And I had not really, it seems weird to me now because it seems like so obvious that there is this problem and this tension between the two camps. But again, sincerely, at the time, I really did not know that there was so much tension. And I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, there's a large amount of tension between these two camps. So that's when I kind of just threw myself into Judaism, Jewish mysticism from its original standpoint, because I had received such a loud message from my ancestors. Pick this path, not the other one. Like, we want you to study this, we want you to know this, but we don't want you to do it the way that you're doing it. So I took that and I ran with it. And now I guess it's been three or 4 years since then. And I probably study Jewish mysticism more than any other type of mysticism at this point. And it is an ancestor thing. It's not that I think that Kabbalah is the right way to do mysticism. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way to do mysticism. I have a very instrumentalist view of a lot of these concepts. I don't think that I'm very agnostic at the end of the day. Pantheism, I do believe in, but from there, it's like instrumentalist only. But to me, it's like when I practice Kabbalah and I read Kabbalah, I feel my ancestors with me. And why would I not want their help? Why would I not want, they're one of the spirits that whisper enlightenment in my ears. It's like I have ancestors who were likely students of this. And so they will be like, oh yeah, here's what that means, If when I did that from the Buddhist perspective, that never happened. I never had those moments of somebody whispering in my ear,
That's so interesting. So interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I always end up in this position, right? So from, like as much as you're immersed in this world, as much as we still have this rational brain, and like, because I have a similar thing, right? And it's very much in this kind of folk magic, kind of traditional, kind of British and Irish witchcraft, kind of that world, right? Now, and I've looked at some different forms of much like yourself, different forms of mystic expression of magic, different methodologies, different ways of engaging with the other and understanding the universe. And I got to the point where I'm like, okay, this bit seems to just speak to me, but I also seem to be able to be automatically good at it or automatically have an understanding, and I find it really really reaffirming to hear that from you. You know what I mean? But what I used to kind of wonder, and from that rational brain, I was like, is this some sort of genetic thing, through ancestry, and then kind of developed that. I actually think, well, that's kind of very reductionist, to think about it as kind of like this is just kind of a physical output, as it were, through genes. And a friend of mine was talking about ancestors to me, and from this perspective, I was saying that there's an entanglement, like we have kind of like a spiritual entanglement with our ancestors, and some of them are really looking for someone in their line to have the kind of capability to express certain talents, and play them through. So I just, that was all kind of firing off my head when you were describing this, and you're bringing that work out. It's really interesting. I love that. But I love to hear that kind of like living ancestral connection. I think it's wonderful. Like I really do. And to that end, what has it brought to you? What has that journey with your ancestors in this area of learning, what has it brought to you?
Well, I mean, I'm at the end of the day, besides like what you're saying, I do feel like they participate in the magic that I do with me if I am involved in doing a magic that's of a tradition they would have done. Like I oftentimes can see them in the back of my head, like there with me. But that is kind of secondary to me, to the psychological benefit. Because like I said, I was really outcasted from my family. I was very ostracized from my family. I was a very angry child for being ostracized from the family. A lot of issues with self-love because of that, very in my face being told that I wasn't welcome sort of thing. That when I started doing ancestor work and was received with open arms, both sides, didn't matter, dads, moms, just to be said, oh my gosh, we love you so much and we are so glad to have you here. That healed so much more inside of me than, this feeling of power that I get when they participate in magic. That's nice, and I'm glad that that does work that way. But I would still throw myself in head first just for this feeling of unconditional love from the dead, you know.
It's really moving. That's what a wonderful outcome. That's fantastic. You know, and I really do think this is an area that is so important for people to explore. The ancestral work, you know, you heal the past and it heals you. You know, it's I was going to say a living relationship, but it's a really bad choice of words. You know, but it's an active, maybe an active relationship, participatory. I don't know. You
Yeah,
might
it's
come up with
interdependent.
yes. Oh, lovely. There we go. There we go. It really is. And some of the stories of ancestral healing are really remarkable. How patterns manifest and materialize in one's life. Sometimes in the most vivid way. You know, and it sounds like it's been really like that for you. That's just really moving. And in terms of your practice within that tradition, within that area of exploration, is that something that you're driven to express further? Is it an area that you want to teach? Is it an area you want to go into deeper learning, or what's the avenue for you there?
I feel like if right now in that area, I only feel comfortable putting on the hat of a student. And then, you know, whatever happens with that, however, I feel like what I'm called to as I'm graduating different levels of studenthood, you know, I'm not saying that I won't ever teach it. I just don't know right now if I would ever go down that path. Because right now I'm really actually trying to set better boundaries with them. Because, well, like they fight over me, you know, and I find that to be annoying because it's like I don't really want to be Catholic or Jewish. And I feel like both sides are like, pick me, pick me. And whenever I kind of overindulge in one, the other side can feel a little bit neglected. And, you know, that's been hard when I've had to come up with how am I going to do my weekly rituals with them. And my mom's side of the family is like, pray the rosary. And my dad's side of the family is like, we don't know, celebrate Shabbos. That's weird. Don't pray the rosary. So it's like, I just like kind of have been telling them, you know, look, I'm neither, I'm both. I don't like labels. Please just let me study and let it unfold naturally. And they've been receptive. They've been receptive to that. So I don't have the answers yet, but you know, that's a part of having Saturn in the 9th house and it being my Saturn return is just from the way that astrology works, like if you view astrology as fixed fate, I would not be fated to have an answer to that question right now anyways. So I'm actively working through it as we are talking.
And in terms of, you know, you're mentioning a lot of complexities there around managing, in effect, kind of, as you said, boundaries and kind of managing the expectations of various parties of ancestors. What advice would you have to somebody who is, you know, starting ancestral work in the broadest sense, you know, don't be in a granular thing?
You can tell them no. You can't, and they're not gonna get mad.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna get offended. Like I feel like that's something that was said to me that I did not take to heart. And it wasn't until I was like, I'm emotionally struggling that I remembered that advice. And it's totally fine. They don't mind. they just sometimes get a little excited, especially if you're the first in the line to contact them in a long time. Right. I don't want to claim that I'm the only one in my line ever, but definitely in the past, good 3 or 4 past generations, I'm the first in a while. So
yeah, brilliant, fantastic. I would like to ask if people want to find out more about you and your work and listen to your show. What's the best way that they can do that?
Ooh, so I'm on Instagram and Twitter at SaturnVox. So just Saturn Vox. Then the podcast can be found anywhere that podcasts can be listened to. Wherever you're listening to the one that this is, just go in the search bar and type SaturnVox and it'll come up. And then, my website is just SaturnVox.com. So it's all pretty cohesive.
And are you bookable for readings, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, I do readings. I'm bookable for readings. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/SaturnVox. So those are some other good resources. My blog is free. Feel free to check that out off of the website, which is also happens to be where you can book readings.
Brilliant. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for coming on the Spirit Box.
Oh, me as well. This was such a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you, McCalla. That was a really engaging conversation. Some great food for thought there. If you'd like to know more about McCalla or her work with Saturn Vox, then check out the show notes below, and you can find all of the areas where McCalla is sharing her knowledge. Right, that's it from me. I'm Dara Mason. You'll be listening to the Spirit Box. Talk soon and take care. Bye.